Of course, you did see, as well as I know the fans are very much aware, the Giants have begun to allow some of their people into the facility. Governor Murphy had already okayed that some time ago. The NFL has done so as well. And so the Giants have limited people, including John Mara and Dave Gettleman, as they said during their announcement yesterday, who have entered the building as the Giants try to get back to some sense of normalcy.
Well, that's the step, right? That's kind of the first step we've all been waiting for, people to get back over there. Obviously, the really important people are there. And I think it's just probably a time when they're setting up shop. And, I think the biggest problem, if you will, is getting it ready to have people back in the building, Paul. When you talk about all the cleanliness and things they have to do for the future. So I think once they get this little trial and error from the guys that are there, then, as soon as Governor Murphy says more, then more will come through there. But I think it's going to be a while, before the whole crew is back. But we'll see what happens. I hope they're back soon, though.
As the Giants have said, it's a small number of business operations and medical staff. That's all they've got right now. We do know that the medical staff is allowed to treat players who need treatment.
Yeah, and they have been, right?
Those are the only players who can show up.
Sure. Yeah. And again, that's been going on even, back weeks and weeks ago. I mean, so I think that, I don't know how many guys are actually using the facility to do that. Obviously, we don't know because we haven't been there. But the bottom line is whoever is or isn't there, hopefully they're healthy. They've had plenty of time, an extended period of time when you think about everything that's been missed, Paul, up to this point, right? I mean, usually there's guys that have gotten hurt by now because of OTAs and mini camps and things like that. So as far as a healthy roster, I think everybody in the NFL has a healthy roster at this point.
Now, the only thing I do know is that the VP of Medical Services, Ronnie Barnes, has been the guy who is leading the Giants' efforts in trying to comply with all of the medical restrictions that they're going to have before any of us can be considered to get back to the Quest Diagnostics Training Center. I'm just concerned that if there is a height requirement, Lance may never get on the show again.
Well, we've got the sandbags. We can get them. We can get some platform shoes for him. We'll figure it out.
Buy him some extra tall cleats, maybe.
Yeah. Well, good thing that we're just on the radio. So
that is true. And we could always hook him up from home, as we've been doing throughout the course of this pandemic.
Yeah. He seems a lot taller from home.
In any event, folks, it's 973-667-1960. That is 1960, if you want to make it easy for yourself. There is one thing I wanted to talk to you about, Jeff, because we got this email from Josh from Westchester. And I know if we get phone calls, I will get to your calls in just a bit. We may have a special guest coming up there in the second half of the show. Not quite sure, so I won't promise you that. But there is this email that did come in through the website. And Josh was talking about how listeners love to talk about the offensive and defensive personnel groups and the concepts and the schemes and the coverages. But he says, he hasn't got a clue when it comes to special teams. And he says he thinks an in-depth special teams show would be really interesting, and obviously having Jeff Feagles on the show, yourself, would be a great time to do it. Now, I don't know how deep we're going to go here, especially if we start getting some phone calls. But I do think there are some things that you and I have talked about many times off the air regarding special teams that would probably be some of interest to our listeners because, after all, it is a third of the game, as we have often discussed. And I think one of the biggest questions that I've always had, and you've never been able to justify it, so I'm going to ask you on the air, and maybe the listeners can understand why you're so puzzled about it. We often see former players become defensive coaches, for that matter, even coordinators, and sometimes head coaches. We never really see any special teams guys become coaches. Why?
Well, what do you mean become coaches? We've had a couple. I mean, our head coach for the Giants is a special teams coach.
Okay, no. Special teams players.
Oh, become coaches as far as special teams coaches? You mean like they go
special?
From a player,
yes,
like
special,
a David Tyree, for instance. Like
exactly. Special teams guys who excelled at special teams.
Yeah.
They know how to get it done. They know the mentality, the emotions that it takes, the physicality that it takes, the wherewithal that it takes better than anybody. Well, and none of those guys ever get to be coaches.
I think that the reason I feel is the skill set. I feel like if you're a positional player, a defensive lineman or linebacker, receiver, quarterback, I feel like those guys want to get into the game and coach the position that they played forever, even though that a linebacker or a safety or a receiver, they did play special teams, but that was kind of secondary for them. So I feel like their expertise they bring to the table is their position and their experience from that. And it probably goes a lot further than going into special teams. Now, it's a great question, and I'm glad that somebody brought this up finally, because I would like to spend just a couple minutes on this. First of all, I don't think people realize, and when you talk about Joe Judge and you talk about like John Harbaugh and these guys that have become head coaches from the special teams coaching position, they are the one coach that has a footprint, or if you will, their hands on every player in the building with meetings, okay? So think about this. There's a punt team, there's a punt return team, there's a kickoff and a kickoff return team. Mm-hmm. There's a field goal block team. Mm-hmm. There's an onside kickoff team, an onside kickoff return team, which is called the hands team. Mm-hmm. Then you've got to field a kickoff after a safety. You've got to field a kickoff for a safety. Think about this, folks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That is 10 position, like 10
units. It's units.
It's units.
More units than any other part of the game.
So my point being is the special teams coach can't just have 6 guys playing all these positions. This is, and there's skill sets for every single one of these guys. Kickoff return, the wedge guys, those aren't going to be your linebackers. Those are going to be your linemen. So, and then you've got your offensive formation for a field goal team. So the challenge you have being a special teams coach is, number one, fielding all of these units. But the second thing is, and Paul, you know this, during the week you have injuries. During the week you have guys that are promoted to starters. Then all of a sudden you have to promote a guy that's a second team or a third teamer on the punt team up to second team, or now he's going to start. You got to get him reps. And so this goes along with, we call it the Big Four for those that are listening. The Big Four is punt, punt return, kickoff return. Those are your 4 biggest plays that take up the most yardage in a special teams play. The punt is the biggest one. It's the number one team on special teams is the punt team, because there's a lot of things that can happen. You can have a block kick, huge momentum. You can have a punt return for a touchdown against you, another huge momentum play. So it takes a lot of guys to play consistently on that unit is the most important. But for special teams, the coach has to coach all of these, and you only have so many minutes in the day to coach these Big Four, and then you have your other field goal block team. Those are the 6 that you usually are the most common ones. So it is important. Some of the schemes that go into each one of these units changed weekly. You hear Joe Judge talk about the offense and defense, how they're going to be like a chameleon. They're going to change weekly. Well, that's nothing new to a special teams coach, because their schemes, they change weekly. You might go against a returner that's not that good, a punt returner, and you can maybe do some things on punt. There's other days when you've got Deshaun Jackson back there, or guys, they're just so dangerous that you're going to have to rely on your punter to get things done by kicking it directionally out of bounds. And then a return teams. There are some guys that, punters that don't hang the ball very good, and they kick it down in the middle of the field. So you've got a good opportunity to set up a punt return play that you work during the week. And hopefully you can get a hat on a hat, they call it, a guys that you can match up with and get your blocking schemes down to bust one and get a good return. Special teams coaches, they're looking for the home run, but they really, on punt return, the goal is 2 things, Paul. Number one, give the ball back to the offense. That's the number one goal on punt return.
Ball security, especially.
Ball security. So the defense has just stopped the other opposing offense. You want to give that ball back to your offense. The last thing you want to do is put their defense back on the field, or your defense.
That's the Phil McConkey rule, as Parcells used to call it.
Okay, I like that. And so that's the number one rule. The second thing is you want to make a first down on a punt return. So if you can get a 10-yard return, then you've made a first down for the offense, which is great. Okay, and then on punt team, you want to eliminate. We have goals. There's a big special teams goals board that's in the special teams room that every week you try to, reach these goals. And 40-yard net is usually a goal for the punt team. If you don't want to give up any big plays in any of the special teams, Big Four, no big plays against you. You want a big play for you. and that would be either in punt return is a return over like 15 yards. Punt team, no big plays against you. So there's all kinds of things that go into this. And by the way, yes, the question that we got, we always stress offense and defense. Well, they get a bulk of the practice. And Paul, you've been out to practice. John's been out to practice, and Lance been out to practice. We've seen over and over how the practices start. They start with special teams, 10 minutes. 10 minute special teams period. Then they go into their stretching and their warm-ups, and then they go offense, defense, and then there's a 10-minute special teams period in the middle of the practice, and then there's a 10-minute special teams practice usually at the end. So you get 30 minutes a day for practice. And by the way, that is not every team. That's just the Giants. Now, I would imagine that you'll get at least that with Joe Judge, being an ex-special teams guy. But I remember when I was with Buddy Ryan, we probably had 10 minutes. That was it. I mean, he gave Al Roberts, who was our special teams coach, 5 minutes before and 5 minutes during, and that was it. I just think that even though it's a third of the game, there's a lot of people that just discount it. But I do believe that it's become so important nowadays that most teams are allowing that amount of allocation towards the time for practice because you have to. But if
the Giants historically, Jeff, I would say this: the Giants historically over the last 30-something years. I mean, I'm going into my 38th season now. They have always placed an emphasis on special teams. They've been one of those teams that early on identified that we need to put effort into this part of the game.
Well, I got to believe that because of that, they were probably one of the few teams that at the beginning started having a snapper. And, a guy that they brought in. And really, you're the big three, those guys, the snapper, the holder, and the kicker, or the snapper, the punter, and the kicker, they have to be good. Those guys got to be good. I've talked so many times when one of those positions is compromised, you got problems. What do you want out of your field goal kicker? Some of the goals as a field goal kicker is inside 40 yards, 100%. Most NFL kickers should be 100% inside 40 yards. That's the goal there. And then as you move out, some of the goals change a little bit. The other one is, I would say, is on kickoff, the punter. You want to have a 40-yard net and eliminate your returns. So a lot and snapping got to be consistent. That's what you want. So lots of stuff that goes into it. We could probably talk. I could talk hours about this, but I know we don't have all that much time today. But it is a good question, and thank you for chiming in on that.